My parents didn't pay a cent for my school trip. When I asked, my mom said, "You're just dead weight." My dad added, "Trips are for kids with a future." I sold my sketches to fund it. Midway through the trip, a famous artist approached me. "Who made this?" Days later, I was on the news. My parents tried to claim credit. Last night my mom messaged me, "We always knew you'd make it." Then my dad added, "You owe us everything. Without us, you'd be nothing." Meanwhile, all I can think about is how, years ago, when I asked them to help fund a simple school trip that could change my life, my mom called me dead weight and my dad said, "Trips are for kids with a future." They didn't pay a cent. I funded it myself selling sketches during lunch. On that trip, a famous artist spotted my work. Everything changed after that. Now they want to act like proud parents. I honestly don't know what to say to them anymore. My name's Eliora. I'm 28 now, but I still remember being 17 and sitting at the cracked kitchen table in our house just outside Seattle. The walls were that faded yellow color nobody likes but nobody bothers to repaint. My mom, Marla, was standing at the stove, stirring something half-heartedly. My dad, Peter, was glued to his phone. I slid the permission slip across the table like it was some secret document. "There's an art history trip. To New York. For school," I said. "They'll take us to museums, workshops with real artists. It's kind of a big deal." Peter didn't even look up. Marla gave a dry laugh. "Art," she said, like the word tasted bad. I kept talking, trying to sound normal even though my throat was tightening. "It's $1,800. I can save up some, but I was hoping, if you could maybe help with the rest?" That's when my mom dropped the spoon into the sauce, splashing it everywhere. She wiped her hands on a dish rag and turned to me, arms crossed. "You're just dead weight," she said. Dead weight. Like I was a burden dragging them down. Peter finally looked up, gave me a look of disgust, and said, "Trips are for kids with a future." And just like that, the conversation was over. I spent that night staring at the ceiling in my room, wondering why it hurt so much. I knew they didn't care about my art. I knew they wanted a daughter who rattled off biology facts, not one who filled every spare scrap of paper with sketches. But hearing it out loud, that I was nothing but dead weight, crushed something inside me. The next morning at school, I sat alone at lunch flipping through my sketchbook, more out of habit than anything else. That's when Mindy from English class passed by, saw my drawings, and asked, "You selling these?" I said yes before I even thought about it. $10 a sketch. It felt ridiculous at first, asking people to pay for my messy little drawings. But by the end of the week, I'd sold a dozen. Word got around fast. People wanted portraits, sketches of their pets, their cars, favorite celebrities. I took everything. I skipped lunch, stayed up late filling orders. I drew until my fingers cramped. 3 months later, I walked into Ms. Harper's office and handed her a fat envelope full of sweaty bills and quarters. She counted it twice before smiling at me. "You're going to New York," she said. It didn't feel real until I was on the plane. New York was overwhelming and beautiful and loud. Everything about it was alive. We crammed 12 girls into 2 tiny hostel rooms near Times Square. The floor creaked when you walked. The radiators clanged all night. I didn't care. I barely slept anyway, running on excitement. The museums were everything I'd dreamed of. The Met, MoMA, the Guggenheim, places I'd only seen in textbooks. I filled page after page in my sketchbook, faces in the crowd, crooked lampposts, dogs chasing pigeons in Central Park. One afternoon at the Met, while the others buzzed around the European paintings, I wandered into the modern wing. I found a brutalist sculpture tucked away in a side room and sat down on the floor, sketching it quickly, messily, like trying to capture a moving train. I didn't even notice the woman standing behind me until she spoke. "Who made this?" I jumped. She was tall, sharp-looking, dressed simply but somehow elegant. French accent. I remember that clearly. Me?" She crouched beside me, studying my sketchbook like it was something precious. Her name was Camille Durant. I knew it immediately. Even I knew who she was, one of the most famous living artists, with work selling for millions. She asked to see more. I handed over my sketchbook, terrified. 20 minutes later, she gave me her card and told me she wanted to offer me a scholarship to a summer program at Parsons in New York. Fully paid. It didn't even feel real. When I got home, the news broke fast. Local teen discovered by renowned artist at Met, the Seattle Times headline blared. Peter and Marla's reaction was immediate. They dusted off every crayon drawing I'd ever made and started telling anyone who would listen that they had nurtured my creativity from the start. They even got invited to speak on local radio. Peter talked about believing in my potential, while Marla claimed she always knew I was special. Meanwhile, the truth was still raw in my mind: the Altoids tin full of sweaty cash, the skipped lunches, the way they called me dead weight and didn't pay a dime for the trip. When a reporter asked me about my journey, I told the truth. I said I sold sketches to pay for it myself. That my parents didn't support it. I didn't even think twice about it. After that, people looked at Peter and Marla differently. Neighbors stopped waving when they drove by. My aunt, who was always cool with me but distant with my parents, cut ties completely. Peter tried grounding me. Marla screamed that I was ungrateful. I didn't care. Their power over me was gone. The summer program at Parsons was brutal but amazing. I stayed in the dorms, shared a tiny room with 3 other girls who already dressed like they were famous. We painted, drew, sculpted for 12 hours a day. My fingers bled some nights. My back ached from standing so long. But I loved it. Camille visited twice. She pushed me harder than anyone else ever had. When she saw a sketch I almost threw away, she said, "There's something in you, Eliora. Something raw." At the end of the summer, Camille sat me down and told me she wanted to mentor me for real. She offered to sponsor my application to a studio residency in Paris. One of the best programs in the world. I called Peter and Marla because legally, I still needed parental signatures. They didn't congratulate me. They just saw dollar signs. Peter demanded a contract, 10% of any earnings. Marla wanted me to mention them in interviews. They even threatened not to sign unless I agreed. I signed whatever they wanted. I just needed out. Paris was a dream. I rented a tiny attic room with slanted walls and a view of the city. I painted like my life depended on it. I learned how to mix paints from scratch, how to stretch canvas properly, how to critique and accept critique without flinching. 6 months later, I got my first gallery show. It sold out. I made more money in one weekend than Peter and Marla made in a year. They messaged me constantly after that. Emails. Texts. Facebook posts. All the same tone: proud, loving parents who just wanted a little attention. A little credit. At first I ignored them. But the messages got nastier. Accusations. Guilt trips. Demands. You'd be nothing without us. You owe us. I started leaving my phone on silent. I stopped checking Facebook altogether. I threw myself into work, taking every opportunity that came my way: exhibitions, artist talks, guest lectures. My life was full for the first time, not with chaos or guilt, but with real, honest work. The kind of work that leaves you bone-tired but happy. Still, the messages kept coming. Peter emailed me article after article about kids who got rich and helped their struggling parents. Marla sent long, rambling voicemails about how hard raising me had been, about all the sacrifices they'd made, all the vacations they didn't take because of me. Sacrifices? I thought. They couldn't even buy me pencils without complaining. Every time I saw their names flash on my screen, a tight knot formed in my stomach. I didn't answer. About a year after my first gallery show, Helena Ward, the gallery owner who had taken a chance on me at Parsons, sat me down in her airy office in Paris. "We're getting offers from New York," she said simply. She slid a contract across the desk. A solo exhibition. Manhattan. One of the most respected contemporary galleries in the city. It felt surreal. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you can fly. I signed. The exhibition announcement made headlines: from street sketches to Soho, Eliora Klein's meteoric rise. They spelled my name wrong the first few times, but I didn't even care. The press picked up old quotes about how I'd sold sketches to fund my first trip. Some of the older interviews resurfaced, including the ones where I talked about my parents' lack of support. That's when Peter and Marla really snapped. They showed up at my Paris studio without warning. I heard the buzzer echo through the building's old stone walls. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most visitors made appointments weeks in advance. I pressed the intercom button, already annoyed. "Who is it?" "It's your mother," Marla's voice snapped through the speaker. I froze. I almost didn't open the door. Every bone in my body told me not to. But curiosity, or maybe old habits, made my fingers move before my brain caught up. They looked almost ridiculous standing there in the courtyard, Peter in his wrinkled polo shirt, Marla clinging to a knockoff handbag, both of them squinting up at the building like they couldn't believe it was real. They came inside without waiting to be asked, dragging the smell of airplane sweat and cigarette smoke with them. The first thing Peter said wasn't hello. "Must be nice," he muttered, running a hand along the exposed brick wall. Marla's eyes darted around the studio, lingering on the canvases stacked against the walls, the easel in the corner, the small kitchenette barely big enough for a coffee pot. "You could have helped us out, you know," she said, voice sticky sweet and accusing at the same time. I didn't answer. They talked for an hour straight, mostly about themselves. How hard life was. How expensive everything had gotten. How proud they were, but also how disappointed I didn't bring them along for the ride. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask about my work. At one point, Marla actually said, "You're lucky we let you go on that trip. None of this would have happened otherwise." Lucky. Lucky they called me dead weight? Lucky they refused to help? I felt something hot and raw rise in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I sat there like a ghost while they filled my beautiful studio with their noise. Finally, Peter got to the point. "You should send us something. A little thank you. You owe us." He wasn't talking about a card or flowers. He was talking about money. After they left, I stood by the window for a long time, staring down at the streetlights flickering on below. The whole studio smelled wrong, stale air, cigarette smoke, cheap perfume. It wasn't anger I felt. Not anymore. It was something colder. Sadder. I thought about all the years I spent wishing they would notice me. Care about me. Support me. I thought about the nights I sat in my bedroom, drawing by flashlight because Peter said electricity bills were too high. I thought about selling sketches for lunch money while they went out to chain restaurants and left me home. I wasn't the same girl anymore. I didn't owe them anything. Still, I didn't block them. Not yet. Some small part of me still clung to the fantasy that they might change. That someday, maybe, they'd come back, not demanding, not angry, but real. Honest. That maybe, one day, they'd say, "We're sorry." Of course, that's not what happened. When the New York show opened, Peter and Marla showed up again, this time uninvited, again. They smiled for every camera, shoved their way into conversations with curators, even tried to sell their own story to a local news station. They supported me from the beginning, Marla gushed, wrapping an arm around my shoulders so tight it felt like a chokehold. I said nothing. When the cameras were off, Peter leaned down and hissed in my ear, "Don't forget who made you." That night, I sat alone in my hotel room overlooking the Hudson, still dressed in my exhibition clothes, makeup smudged, shoes kicked off. My phone buzzed again and again on the nightstand. Texts from Marla. Messages from Peter. Missed calls. Each one a brick, building a wall higher and higher around me. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the city buzz and breathe outside my window while my phone kept buzzing like a dying insect on the nightstand. At some point, I turned it face down just to stop seeing their names. The next morning, when I got to the gallery for a scheduled artists' brunch, I found out Peter and Marla had gone one step further. They'd given an interview to a local arts blog. I read the article in stunned silence. "We always encouraged Eleora's creativity from day one," Marla said. "We knew she had a gift. We sacrificed so much to get her where she is today." Peter's quote was worse. "Without family support, talent means nothing. We were there for every step of her journey." I almost laughed. The bitterness clawed up my throat until I had to excuse myself to the restroom to sit on the cool tile floor, breathing hard. Every word was a lie. Every word painted me as some grateful child whose parents scraped and saved to lift her to the stars. It felt like being erased. Like they were rewriting my life without asking. When I finally stumbled back out into the main room, Helena was waiting for me. She didn't say much, she never did, but she handed me a copy of the exhibition contract. "You're the artist," she said simply. "Not them." It took me a second to realize what she meant. I had the right to control my story. To control my image. To decide who got to stand next to me. And who didn't. Still, it wasn't easy. There's a strange guilt that comes with pulling away from the people who made you, even if they only made you by accident. Even if they spent most of your life trying to convince you that you were nothing special. For a few weeks after the show, I let things sit. I ignored their messages but didn't respond. I didn't block them yet. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every text they sent was like a splinter under my skin. We deserve some recognition. You wouldn't be where you are without us. Your success is our success. When they didn't get a response, the tone shifted. The guilt trip sharpened into knives. You're ungrateful. You're selfish. We should have never let you go to New York in the first place. That last one gutted me more than I cared to admit. Because they were right, in a way. If they hadn't said no, if they hadn't pushed me to fend for myself, maybe I wouldn't have fought so hard. Maybe I wouldn't have sold sketches in high school cafeterias or learned to survive off nothing. Maybe without their cruelty, I wouldn't have been so desperate to prove them wrong. One night, sitting on my balcony in Paris with a glass of cheap wine, I found myself scrolling back through old photos on my phone. Photos I never looked at anymore. A birthday cake with one candle already burned low. A picture of a sketchbook my mom threw away by accident, or maybe on purpose, and laughed about. A blurry snapshot of Peter watching TV while I stood awkwardly at the edge of the frame, sketchbook clutched to my chest. None of them looked like love. None of them felt like home. Camille called me a few days later. She never pried, but somehow she knew. You don't owe them a piece of yourself just because they gave you life, she said quietly. And suddenly I knew she was right. But even knowing that, cutting the cord wasn't easy. It didn't happen in one dramatic fight. It didn't happen in a screaming match or a flurry of insults. It happened quietly. One day, I simply stopped answering. When Marla tagged me in an old baby photo on Facebook with a caption about how far we've come, I removed the tag. When Peter messaged me demanding money for a new car, I didn't reply. When they called, I let it ring until it stopped. At first, it felt like leaving the stove on, like forgetting something important. A low-level panic in my chest every time I silenced my phone. But slowly, the panic faded. And what replaced it was peace. Meanwhile, my career kept growing. Another gallery signed me. A collector commissioned a massive piece for a luxury hotel in Dubai. I flew to Berlin for a residency. Then Tokyo. Then London. Each success felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. Some braver, shinier version of myself. At gallery shows, people shook my hand and told me I was brilliant, gifted, lucky. None of them knew about the Altoids tin full of crumpled cash. None of them knew about the nights I cried myself to sleep over permission slips and empty plates. And I didn't tell them. Not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't the whole story anymore. I wasn't just the girl they didn't believe in. I was the woman I built myself into, piece by bloody piece. I didn't expect to hear from Peter and Marla again after months of silence. I thought maybe they finally got the message. Maybe they found a new story to tell about themselves. Maybe they gave up trying to rewrite mine. But of course, it wasn't that simple. One morning, I woke up to an email from a lawyer representing my parents. The words blurred together at first, but the meaning was clear. They were threatening to sue me. They claimed they were entitled to a share of my earnings. Their argument? That they had invested in my early art education by providing emotional and financial support during my formative years. I almost laughed. Emotional support? Financial support? My parents hadn't paid for a pencil, let alone a lesson. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire who handled contracts for a lot of artists in Paris. Her reply was simple: they don't have a case. We'll shut this down. And we did. Fast. But the whole thing left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't enough to block them quietly anymore. They weren't just a bad memory now, they were actively trying to profit off of me. I realized something then: they would never stop unless I made them stop. So I made a decision. I was scheduled to speak at a major conference in New York that fall, a panel on young artists and resilience. They asked if I'd be willing to share a little of my personal story. At first, I hesitated. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was my chance. Not to rant. Not to whine. Not to accuse. But to tell the truth. My truth. The auditorium was packed the day I spoke. Lights in my eyes, mic clipped to my jacket, water bottle sweating in my hand. I talked about growing up feeling invisible. About selling sketches in cafeterias to fund a dream nobody else believed in. About finding mentors who saw value in me when my own family didn't. I didn't say their names. I didn't need to. People knew. By the time I finished, half the audience was crying. The applause was deafening. The clip went viral within a day. Artist Eliora Klein on overcoming neglect and building a life from scratch. News outlets picked it up. Blogs reposted it. Art journals wrote essays about it. And just like that, the narrative my parents tried so hard to control, the lie they wrapped themselves in, fell apart. They tried to defend themselves, of course. Marla posted a long Facebook status about how hard parenting is and how memory is subjective. Peter gave a radio interview where he called me ungrateful and dramatic. But nobody bought it. The comments under their posts were brutal. People saw right through them. Old neighbors shared stories about how I always showed up to school events alone. Former teachers chimed in about how I bought my own supplies. Friends from high school posted about how I hustled every lunch period to sell drawings. Their little house of lies collapsed overnight. The final blow came a few weeks later. I was honored at a gala in Paris, a prestigious award for emerging artists who had overcome adversity. The organizers asked if I'd like to invite family. I said yes. I invited Camille. I invited Helena. I invited Mindy, the girl who bought my first sketch for $10 in the Roosevelt High cafeteria. But I didn't invite Peter or Marla. Instead, I sent them a card. A simple white card with gold edges, embossed with 2 words, "No longer required." Inside, I tucked a photo, not of me receiving the award, not of my paintings, but of the little Altoids tin where I saved every dollar for that first trip. The real beginning of my story. I heard later from a distant cousin that Marla cried when she realized she wasn't invited. That Peter punched a wall. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt free. Today, I still paint in my little studio in Paris. I still mentor young artists who come from nothing. I still keep that Altoids tin on my shelf, right next to my first real sketchbook. And every time I look at it, I remember, dead weight doesn't drag you down forever. Sometimes it teaches you how to fly.